When we come to the fifth dynasty, we come to what I suppose would be my favourite king in the northern kingdom, if I had to have one, and that is King Jehu. He was the army general that was anointed by Elisha, and his job was to remove the dynasty of Omri and to indeed fulfill the word of the Lord through Elijah. And so we now come to his dynasty. He had four of his sons on the throne, as you see, and this was actually to fulfill the promise in chapter 10, verse 30. And the reason this promise was made was because he did some good things. The Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in carrying out what I consider right, and in accordance with all that was in my heart, having dealt with the house of Ahab, your sons of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. Sadly, we go on, but Jehu was not careful to follow the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all of his heart. For he did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam, which he caused Israel to sin. In other words, he didn't remove the golden calves. You'll notice this is all the way through when it comes to the northern kingdom. Jeroboam the first, I'm sure, had no idea of the awfulness. Well, he should have had some idea of the awfulness of what he was doing. And dynasty after dynasty, the question was, would they remove these calves? And sadly, there wasn't one of them that did. So anyway, we come to dynasty number 5. We see that Jehu was anointed king in chapter 9, and he was commanded to destroy the house of Ahab. And that's what he did. He executed King Jehoram in chapter 9. He then fulfilled the word of Elijah. He executed Jezebel. Exactly the words of Elijah were fulfilled, and he also executed the whole house of Ahab. And I mentioned before that was common practice. And he removed Baal worship. And this was the thing he got commended for. And he did this, you'll remember, by going to Samaria and saying that he wanted to worship Baal, and he had gathered all of the worship of Baal together in the temple of Baal, and then he had them all executed. And that temple became a public toilet. But he went too far. He didn't only fulfill the words of judgment on the house of Omri, the house of Ahab, but he also killed Azariah of Judah. He wasn't told to do that. The consequence of that is that Azariah's mother, Athaliah, she was a Phoenician princess, she ended up claiming the throne. Jehu also killed the leaders and close friends of Jehoram. He also killed the relatives of King Azariah of Judah. He wasn't told to kill the close friends of Joram, and he wasn't told to kill Azariah, the king of Judah. And I want you to notice in Hosea, just a little note here in Hosea chapter 1 verse 4, where it talks there, for in a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. So that tells us that the prophets Hosea and Amos and some of these others are going to be coming into the picture very soon. But just to say that Jehu went a step too far, but also a step too short. As we've read, he did not return from the sins of Jeroboam. Let's just read that again. Chapter 10, verse 29. But Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he caused Israel to sin, the golden calves that were in Bethel and Dan. And that, to me, is one of the big tragedy of Jehu. In many ways, he was a really good king, but he didn't do this. During his reign, Israel was diminished in size. We read that in chapter 10, 32 and 33. In those days, the Lord began to trim off parts of Israel. Hazael defeated them through the territory of Israel. And what we see is all of the land on the east of the Jordan was taken, and some of the land of Galilee as well. Now remember, Elisha anointed Hazael. He was one of the means of bringing judgment and discipline on the northern kingdom. Something else we know from regular archaeology, history, is that at this time Shalmaneser, the Assyrian king, also attacked the northern kingdom. Now this is not mentioned in the Bible. Again, to mention that the author or authors of Kings were very selective in what they included, because they had their own agenda of the point they were trying to make. But this artifact was discovered, and here is a clearer picture. This is standing in the British Museum in London, and if ever you're there you can go and see it. But each of these 5 levels there, the panels are telling a story. And one of those panels is telling a story of Shalmaneser attacking Jehu. And here, this is a picture of one of the panels, a photograph of one of the panels. You see this man kneeling down before Shalmaneser III, and the inscription indicates that that is actually Jehu that is bowing down. Now, with all of the executions that happened in the northern kingdom, actually he would have weakened his position probably when it comes to military might, and here we see he surrendered to become a vassal of Shalmaneser for a time. Then we come to 2 Kings 11 and 12, and we have an account of Athaliah in the south there in Judah. And with the death of Ahaziah, this king that Jehu shouldn't have killed, with his death, Athaliah is involved in a coup. She destroys all of the royal family. But one of the sons of Ahaziah, Joash, was protected. One of the sisters of Ahaziah took her nephew and hid him away, and therefore he was not included in that bloodbath, and he was taken to the temple and protected by the priest Jehoiada. So this was a time of absolute apostasy in the southern kingdom. It would have been full-on Baal worship, so for about 7 years. But then the boy was crowned. Couldn't imagine the boy of 7 being crowned, but this is what happened. And there was a rebellion. Athaliah was killed, and there was a restoration of the temple, and the southern kingdom was back on track. Joash did really well during the life of the priest of Jehoiada. Things didn't go so well when he died, but nonetheless Judah was back on track. So back to the northern kingdom, we then have Jehu was succeeded by his son Jehoahaz. The king of the north, Hazael, defeated him repeatedly, but again we see an expression of the grace of God in chapter 13 verse 4. But Jehoahaz entreated the Lord, and the Lord heeded him, for he saw the oppression of Israel, how the king of Aram oppressed him. So again, we see God reaching out when there was a calling upon him. God responded and showed mercy. But the tragedy at the end, we read, is that he did not depart from the sins of the house of Jeroboam, which he made Israel to sin, but walked in them. In other words, idolatry was not removed. We come to Jehoash or Joash. Sometimes these kings are given two names, and you have to be very careful to make sure you understand the person is talking about. And he tragically continued in the same way. And then we have Amaziah in the south, who did battle with Jehoash and lost, and so there was war between the north and the south. And so we come to King Jeroboam II. He was the great-grandson of Jehu. And actually, it's interesting because Jeroboam II was the last great or most powerful king in Israel. Because the Assyrians had attacked Syria in the north and destroyed Damascus and other Syrian cities, there was really a power vacuum. And Jeroboam II moved north and controlled those areas. The reason was the Assyrians were very aggressive. And then Jonah, as you either know or will know when you study the prophet Jonah, he prophesied in Nineveh, and the Assyrians for a period stopped their empire building and their armies marching and committing the atrocities that they had been committing. And so that left a power vacuum, and we have Jeroboam II controlling all of the land to the north, extending Israel to the former limits. In the south we have Azariah, or Uzziah as he's known. He goes by both names. He was a godly king. He finished not so well, sadly, but he was a godly king for the most part, had incredible victories in his own right, and there was peace between Jeroboam II and Uzziah, and so between them they actually controlled pretty much the same amount of land as under the reign of David. Now, as you come to these kings, you are coming to the time when we have Hosea and Amos beginning to minister in the north, and the northern kingdom was going through, under Jeroboam II, tremendous prosperity, but also incredible injustice. And that is in keeping with the awfulness of idolatry. Idolatry is not just worship of a foreign god, it's a whole worldview, it's a whole mindset, and it works its way out in tragic ethics and lifestyle and cruelty and all sorts of things that God hated and he didn't want for his nation. And when you read Amos and Hosea, you see exactly the kind of thing that the prophets prophesied. And then we come to the time also of Isaiah, chapter 6 of Isaiah. It was in the year that Uzziah died that he had his call. And so we're coming to that particular period now in Israel and Judah's history. And so just to finish the northern kingdom, we now have Zechariah on the throne. The prophecy to Jehu was fulfilled. He reigned for 6 months, and then there was Shallum, another army general I believe, rose up, and there was a coup, and the house of Jehu was destroyed. And in many ways this marked the end of the northern kingdom. There was just a few more years left, and there was a lot of civil war, and then tragically the end came.